Chioma, I already got us tickets for the semifinals and final. Whole family at the stadium watching the U.S. team. It's gonna be amazing.
Legacy, just leave. You're killing the vibe for everyone.
Okay.
Chioma, is it okay? He is deserved. That
You canceled the flights?
You told me to go home. I paid for every ticket, every night at that hotel, every minute of that tour. When I go, it goes with me.
You can't do that to the kids.
Already handled. This was never about the kids for you, though, was it?
Chioma says nothing. Her lips part, but no words come out. That silence is louder than any confession could ever be. What did Legacy already know 3 full days before that gate? Right at gate A23 of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, with our World Cup family trip to Miami just minutes from boarding, my wife Chioma looked me in the eyes and said, "Legacy, just go home. You're killing the vibe for everyone." My name is Legacy Jefferson. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent my whole life believing that love works the same way a house does. You lay the foundation first. You don't rush the walls. You trust that if you build it right, it holds. Through storms, through settling, through years. I've built houses for other families for 20 years. I thought I'd built one for my own, too. I didn't answer her right away. Behind us, my son Jameer, 16, all elbows and nerves before a big trip, fumbled his phone and it slipped from his hand, clattering face up on the tile. For half a second, before he could snatch it back up, I saw the screen. A text thread with his mother from 3 weeks back. "After this trip, we're going to have a serious talk about your father." I didn't say anything. I just looked at it, then looked away. The way you look away from a nail sticking up through a board. You clock it, you remember where it is, and you keep walking so nobody sees you flinch. For just a second, standing there under those gate lights, I was somewhere else entirely. Back at Ebenezer Baptist Church in 2009, 25 years old in a rented tuxedo, watching a 21-year-old Chioma walk toward me in her mother's veil. Both of us too young to understand what 17 years of promises actually costs a person. I thought I'd found someone to build something lasting with. Standing at that gate, I found myself wondering which version of her I'd actually married. The girl in that veil, or the woman now laughing 20 feet away like I was luggage she'd decided not to check. Here's what you need to understand before we go any further. I had planned this trip for 8 months. Not weeks, months. I'd paid for it in full. 4 VIP match tickets to the World Cup group stage in Miami. $1,100 each. A 3-night suite at the Intercontinental Miami. Ocean view. The kind Chioma had pinned to a board on her phone back in October. A private guided tour of Hard Rock Stadium I'd booked through a contact from a client I'd done a kitchen remodel for in Buckhead. I had a spreadsheet. Yes, an actual spreadsheet, with Ngozi's halal meal preferences highlighted in green, Jameer's favorite snacks listed by gate number, even the confirmation codes printed on paper and folded in my breast pocket, because I don't trust airport Wi-Fi with anything that matters. Chioma had on something new. A cream-colored travel set I hadn't seen before, tags probably cut off in the airport bathroom, if I know her at all. There was a thin gold bracelet on her wrist I didn't recognize either. And I noticed, the way you notice small things without knowing yet why they matter, that she kept touching it, turning it around her wrist, checking her phone every few minutes with a kind of nervous energy that didn't match a woman just excited for vacation. She was laughing with Brielle Thompson, a co-worker of hers, 29, the kind of laugh that made people 2 gates down turn their heads. And then, in front of our children, in front of a boarding line of 40 strangers, she said it again, louder this time, like she needed witnesses. I mean it, Legacy. You've had that look on your face since we left the house. You're going to ruin this whole trip. Just go home. A woman with a rolling suitcase stopped rolling it. A man in a Delta uniform glanced up from his scanner. My daughter, Ngozi, 13 years old, went very still the way she does when she's trying not to cry in public. I want you to know something about me, because it matters for everything that comes after. I don't raise my voice. I never have. My mother, Yuande, raised me to believe that a man who has to shout to be heard has already lost the argument. So I didn't shout. I looked at my wife of 17 years, standing there under the fluorescent lights of Gate A23 with her new travel set and her borrowed laugh. And I said one word. Okay. Then I turned around and walked back toward the terminal doors, past the coffee stand and the shoe shine stand, out into the thick Georgia heat rolling off the tarmac. I didn't slam anything. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't even raise my voice. I just walked. But here's the thing Chioma didn't know as she watched my back get smaller down that concourse, still laughing a little, still performing for whoever was watching. She thought she'd won something. She thought this was the end of an inconvenience, a tired husband sent home so the trip could finally breathe. She had no idea it was only the beginning of what I'd already started building. Before we get into the story, let me back up 3 days, to a Tuesday evening that had nothing dramatic about it at all, because that's usually how these things start. Not with fireworks. With something small and quiet enough that you almost miss it. It was raining that Tuesday in East Atlanta Village, the soft kind that settles over the rooftops without announcing itself. I'd just gotten home from a job site near Mercedes-Benz Stadium, still in my work boots, dust in the creases of my knuckles that never quite comes out no matter how long you scrub. The porch light was on. Ngozi was at the kitchen table doing homework, her box braids pulled up in a claw clip, tongue between her teeth the way she does when she's concentrating on fractions. Jameer was in the den, with his cleats still on, which normally would have earned him a look from his mother about the carpet, except Chioma wasn't home yet. She'd texted an hour earlier. Team building dinner running late. Don't wait up. I made dinner. Big chicken, rice, the green beans Ngozi actually likes because I don't drown them in butter like my mother does. I sat with my kids at that kitchen table, listened to Jameer complain about his coach, listened to Ngozi explain a science project about erosion with more passion than most adults bring to their actual jobs, and I thought, the way I'd thought 1,000 quiet nights before, that this, right here, was the whole point of everything I worked for. I had no idea what was already waiting for me. I just didn't know it yet. But 3 days later, standing at that gate, I already had a plan forming, and Chioma had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect what she thought she could throw away. I didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, I walked into the Delta Sky Club at the Atlanta airport, badge from my Amex Platinum still doing its one useful thing that day. And I sat down at a corner table by the window, where I could watch the planes taxi and not have to watch anyone's face. I ordered black coffee. I opened my laptop. And for the first time in longer than I care to admit, I let myself actually look, really look, at the finances my wife and I had built together. The ones I'd been too tired, too trusting, or maybe too afraid to examine closely before. It started small. A login to our joint bank account, the one that pays the mortgage and the kids' school fees. Nothing unusual there. But 3 clicks deeper, in the linked accounts section Chioma had set up years ago for budgeting, I found something I didn't recognize. A second account, opened 14 months earlier, registered to a P.O. box in Buckhead, a part of Atlanta we'd never lived in, never done business in, had no reason to have any address tied to it all. I sat with that for a long moment, the ice machine behind the bar clunking every few seconds, somebody's toddler crying 2 tables over. Then I opened the transaction history. Over the past 11 months, more than $63,000 had moved out of my contracting business account. Money meant for materials, subcontractor payroll, permit fees, and into that second account. It still had her name on the signer line from back in our early years, when she used to help me keep the books before the business grew too big for a kitchen table ledger. I'd never taken her name off. I never had a reason to, until now. From there, smaller transfers, always under $3,000, always timed a day or two apart, like someone had read an article about staying under the radar. Some of those transfers ended in an account under the name B. Thompson. Brielle. It wasn't rage, not at first. It was the particular quiet that comes right before rage, the stillness of a house right before a storm. I kept scrolling. A charge at the Four Seasons Atlanta, $280, dated a Tuesday in March. The same week Chioma had told me she was at a team-building retreat in Savannah. I remembered because I'd taken both kids to Ngozi's dentist appointment alone that week, sitting in that waiting room thinking about how tired my wife must be from all that team-building. Out of habit more than suspicion, I searched Brielle's name too. Her social media had been scrubbed clean, old photos gone, an engagement announcement from 2 years back nowhere to be found. Like somebody had erased a whole chapter. I filed it away, the way I file a crack in a foundation before I know how deep it runs. I closed the laptop. I finished my coffee. And then, because a man in my position learns to keep building even when the walls are cracking, I made a decision that would matter more than anything else in this story. I decided not to say a word. Not yet. I decided to gather the way I gather materials before a job. Quietly, completely, without letting the client see the truck pull up. My daddy taught me that lesson before I could swing a hammer straight. Measure twice, cut once, he used to say, guiding my hands on a circular saw in our old driveway. He built half the additions on our street in Decatur, and he never cut lumber until he'd walked the job twice in his head. Some part of me, sitting in that Sky Club with a laptop full of things I didn't want to be true, was just doing what he taught me. That night I drove not home, but to my mother's house in Decatur, 20 minutes east, the porch light glowing the way it always has since I was a boy climbing those same steps with skinned knees. My mother, Yawanda, 65 years old, still sharp enough to notice a change in my walk from across a yard, met me at the door with her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair. "You didn't call first," she said. Not a question. An observation, the way she makes most of them. "I need to use the old tablet," I told her. "The one Chioma left here when she stopped visiting so much." My mother's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. The stillness of a woman who'd been waiting a long time for a conversation she didn't want to start herself. "It's in the drawer under the china cabinet," she said, her hands folding together the way they do when she's steadying herself for something. "Same as it's been since Easter." That tablet, an old iPad Chioma had used 2 Christmases ago and left charging in my mother's guest room, Forgotten the way people forget things they don't think matter anymore. Synced the moment it connected to the Wi-Fi. Messages going back 18 months poured in. Most of it was nothing. Recipes. A group chat about a book club she'd quit after 2 meetings. But buried in there, from a thread with a number saved only as B, was a message dated the previous summer, 10 months before that airport gate. Legacy's never going to see it coming. He's too busy being the good guy. I sat in my mother's guest room with that old iPad in my lap for a long time. Outside, I could hear her in the kitchen, the particular clatter of her pulling down her good pie pan, the one she saves for church bazaars and moments she doesn't know how to talk about out loud. My mother has never needed words to tell me she already knew something was wrong. She'd been baking apple pies for the Mount Olive Bazaar every October for 30 years, and somehow, every October I'd come home with some new weight on my shoulders. There'd be a slice waiting on the counter before I even said a word. I thought about Charlotte. 2 years back, I'd turned down the biggest contract of my career, a commercial build that would have doubled my business overnight, because Chioma had said she needed me home more, that the kids needed their father present, not chasing money in another state. I remember standing in our kitchen explaining to my old business partner why I was walking away from 6 figures, and I remember Chioma, later that same week, telling her sister on the phone, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. He's just a subcontractor, really. Always has been. Like the $400,000 I'd turned down for her sake had never happened. Like the high blood pressure medication I started taking that same year, from working double shifts to make up the difference, had never happened either. I didn't say anything then. I don't know if that makes me strong or foolish. Maybe both. 2 days before the airport, my phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. Chioma called me, she said. No greeting, straight to it the way she does when something's sitting heavy on her. 7 months ago. Asked me, her own mother-in-law, how I thought you'd handle a divorce. Whether you'd fight for the house. There was a pause on the line then, longer than she usually allows herself. A silence with something folded up inside it. I sat with that for a moment on my own front porch, the same porch swing that's been creaking since before I was born, since my daddy hung it there for my mother the year Eisenhower was still president, near as anyone can figure. Some things in a family just keep creaking. You learn to live with the sound, until one day, you actually listen to what it's telling you. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her, my mother said, that my son builds foundations for a living. And a man who knows how to build one knows exactly how to take one apart, too, if it was never built to last in the first place. The night before we left for Miami, I found one more thing. An email Chioma had sent her supervisor at the marketing firm in Midtown, requesting time off for what she'd called a personal transition period, beginning the week after our trip. In the body of the email, almost like an afterthought, one line jumped off the screen at me. I'll finally be free to focus on what actually makes me happy. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I closed my laptop, packed the kids' bags myself, checked Ngosi's meal preferences one more time on my spreadsheet, and went to bed beside my wife of 17 years, like a man who didn't know a single thing. She had no idea what I already knew. She had no idea what I'd already started to build in the quiet hours while she slept beside me, believing herself to be so many steps ahead. Chioma still thought she held every card at that airport gate, but she hadn't counted on the one thing I'd learned from 20 years in construction. You never tear a wall down until you know exactly what's behind it. He had proof of betrayal sitting in his hands 3 full days before that airport gate, and said nothing. Smart, disciplined strategy, or emotional cowardice dressed up as patience. Comment confront if you'd have called her out that same night. Or wait if you'd have done exactly what Legacy did. Now let me take you back to those first 20 minutes after I turned my back on that gate. Because there's a piece of that afternoon Chioma never saw coming. I didn't go far. I found a quiet spot near the USO lounge, phone in hand, and I made 4 calls in under 20 minutes. The first call was to Delta, canceling all 4 tickets, mine, Chioma's, Jameer's, and Ngozi's, using the account they were booked under, which was mine, paid for with my card, my name as the primary contact. The second call was to the Intercontinental Miami, canceling the 3-night suite reservation, also under my name, also paid in full by me 8 months earlier. The third call canceled the private Hard Rock Stadium tour. The fourth call canceled the beachfront catering package I'd arranged as a surprise for our last night. A small anniversary-style dinner I'd planned to celebrate 17 years of marriage a few days early, because the actual date fell during the trip. I want to be honest about what those 20 minutes actually were, underneath the calm. They weren't revenge. Revenge is loud. It wants an audience. This was something quieter and, if I'm honest, older than that. A man who had spent 17 years absorbing every small humiliation in silence, finally discovering that silence had a limit, and that the limit didn't look like shouting. It looked like control. My grandfather answered betrayal with his fists, and it cost him everything. My father answered it by drinking himself smaller every year, until there was almost nothing left to see. I think some part of me, sitting there with my phone in my hand, was terrified of becoming either one of them, and canceling 4 reservations quietly, calmly, with a receipt for every dollar, was the only kind of anger I trusted myself not to regret. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't trying to strand my children. The moment I hung up with the caterer, I called Delta back and rebooked 2 one-way tickets, for Jameer and Ngozi only, on a direct flight to Atlanta, departing that same evening, with my sister-in-law agreeing to pick them up at the gate. My children were never going to be left stranded in an airport. Only the trip Chioma had humiliated me in front of 100 strangers to protect. That trip was never going to happen. Not for her. Not for whoever she'd planned to enjoy it with once I was gone. I was still sitting near the USO lounge when my phone buzzed. It was the gate agent's voice coming through Chioma's raised, panicked tone from 30 yards away. I could hear her even without a call. The whole concourse could hear her, as the system flagged all 4 reservations canceled. Then my phone actually rang. Chioma. I let it ring twice before I answered, not out of spite, but because a man needs a breath before he speaks calm words into a storm. My hand wasn't even steady on the phone, if I'm honest. Some part of me, the part that had said vows in front of 200 people 17 years ago, still didn't want this to be real, even as I pressed the screen to answer. You canceled the flights? Her voice cracked on the last word, disbelief chasing anger, chasing something that sounded almost like fear. You told me to go home, I said, keeping my voice level, the way I'd talk to a client whose foundation had just failed inspection. So I'm going home. And I paid for this trip, Chioma. Every ticket, every night at that hotel, every minute of that tour. When I go, it goes with me. You can't do that to the kids. I already rebooked Jameer and Ngozi. They'll be in Atlanta by 9 tonight. Safe, fed, taken care of. The same way I've always taken care of them. I paused. This was never about the kids for you, though, was it? She didn't answer that. That silence told me more than any confession could have. Chioma had built her entire confidence at that gate on one quiet assumption: that I would always absorb it. that the humiliation she handed me in public was safe to hand me, because I'd never once handed it back. What I think she never let herself consider was that the same public performance she was using to control the story could just as easily be turned against her. The moment the man she thought would always stay quiet decided he wouldn't. Her fear wasn't really about 4 canceled tickets. It was the fear of a woman who suddenly realized her narrative was no longer hers alone to write. While I was still on the phone with her, my own screen lit up with an incoming video call from Jamir. I switched over without thinking, some instinct in me needing to see my son's face in the middle of all this. What I saw instead, for 3 or 4 seconds before he realized the camera had flipped, was my wife standing near the gate desk, shoulders shaking, and Brielle Thompson beside her. Not gripping her arm the way a coworker comforts a coworker, not a quick pat on the back. Brielle's hand was flat against the small of Chioma's back, fingers moving slow, familiar. The kind of touch that only happens between 2 people who've touched each other like that 100 times before, in rooms with no one else watching. Chioma wasn't pulling away from it. She was leaning into it. My throat went tight. Not from surprise. Some part of me had already known. Had known since that folder started filling up on my laptop. But from the particular grief of watching a suspicion become a fact, right there in real time, on a 4-inch screen at an airport gate. Jamir's face filled the screen a second later, and I could see in his eyes that he'd seen it too. Right before he turned the camera around, that he'd been standing close enough to catch what I'd only caught for a heartbeat. Dad. His voice broke on the single word, 16 years old and trying so hard to sound like a man. Dad, what's going on? Mom's crying really hard. He didn't need to say more. I heard Ngozi's small voice behind him, scared. Mom? What happened? Through the phone, I caught the chaos at the gate. People filming, the agent trying to calm everyone, and my wife's voice breaking apart in real time. Legacy, please, Chioma begged. Not in front of them. Legacy, please, don't do this in front of them. I'm not doing anything, Chioma, I said quietly, and I meant it. I'm just not doing what I've always done, which is pretend I don't see things so everybody else can stay comfortable. I could hear it happening through the phone before I saw it in person. An airport gate sliding from routine boarding chaos into something people would be describing for days. Somewhere in that crowd, at least 2 phones were recording. By evening, a 15-second clip of my wife sobbing at gate A23 was circulating online with a caption that read simply, "When karma has your boarding pass." I never posted it, never even watched it in full. But it existed now, the way things do once the internet decides they matter. Chioma called me a monster. She called me petty. At one point, according to Jamir, who told me everything later that night with his voice still shaking, she screamed that I had ruined everything, which was, I'll admit, an interesting choice of words for a woman who'd been quietly ruining something herself for over a year. I didn't stay to watch the rest of it unfold. I trusted my sister-in-law to get the kids home safe, and she did, both of them arriving in Atlanta 4 hours later, Ngozi asleep against the window, Jamir staring silently at nothing the whole drive, according to his aunt. Hours later, after sitting with my mother until the coffee had gone cold twice, I pulled into my own driveway in East Atlanta Village. It was almost 10 o'clock. The porch light I'd left on that morning was still burning, patient, the way it always is. I sat in my truck for a long moment before going inside, hands on the wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has just watched something he spent 17 years building, finally, publicly, undeniably come apart, even though I was the one who'd pulled the last board loose. What I didn't yet know, sitting there in that quiet driveway, was that my mother had been carrying something of her own for months. Something that would make everything I'd found that day look small by comparison. This was only the beginning of the real reckoning Chioma had no idea was still coming. 2 days later, I drove back to Decatur with a manila folder on the passenger seat. Bank statements, screenshots from the old tablet, and a flash drive backed up twice. Because a man who builds for a living trusts more than one foundation. My mother met me at the door before I even knocked. She always seemed to sense hard conversations coming, the way she could smell rain before the sky turned gray. "Sit down, baby," she said, leading me to the kitchen table, the one I'd done homework at as a boy. She set a slice of apple pie in front of me without asking, because some things a mother just knows a son needs. "I didn't tell you everything on the phone," she said, hands folded the way they do when something's been weighing on her. "Chioma didn't just ask me about divorce 7 months back. She asked how quickly property gets divided in Georgia. She asked if you'd fight her on the house or just let her have it the way you always do." Her mouth tightened around those last words. "And there's something else. She sent me a video, almost a year ago now." "A video?" I repeated. She thought she was being kind, showing me how happy she'd become. My mother slid her phone across the table. In it, Chioma sat on a hotel balcony, laughing, a glass of champagne trembling as Brielle Thompson leaned into frame beside her. "Yuwande, I've never felt more like myself," Chioma said. "Please don't say anything yet. I just need time to figure out how to do this the right way. For the kids." I set the phone down carefully. "I should have told you the day she sent it," my mother said, her voice unsteady for the first time in longer than I could remember. She begged me not to say a word, and some prideful part of me wanted to believe my silence might still give her room to come to her senses. I told myself I was protecting your marriage. I see now I was protecting myself from being the one who broke it. She took my hand in both of hers. "That's my mistake to carry, not yours." I sat with her confession longer than I let on. It would have been easy to feel betrayed twice over, but I understood something about her then. 65 years of holding every family's cracks together teaches you that silence can feel like strength. She wasn't protecting Chioma. She was protecting the version of our family she still hoped could survive. "You don't owe me an apology, Mama," I told her. "You were trying to protect all of us the only way you knew how." That evening, both kids came by. Jameer sat at that same table, jaw tight, and told us something he hadn't said out loud yet. "Last spring," he said, staring at his hands, "Mom picked me up from practice. She was on the phone, I think with Brielle, and didn't know I could hear her through the speaker. She said, 'Legacy's just a burden at this point. We'll be so much better off without him.'" His voice cracked. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought maybe I heard it wrong. Something in my chest went still and cold. "You didn't hear it wrong," I told him quietly. "But you didn't do anything wrong by not telling me either. That was never your weight to carry." Ngozi hadn't said much all evening, curled into the corner of the couch, but she finally spoke. "Grandma, is it my fault? Did I do something?" My mother crossed the room and pulled her into her arms. "Baby, no. Grown folks make grown decisions with grown selfishness, and children never, not once, cause that. You hear me?" Within the week, word reached Chioma's employer, not from me, but from an anonymous compliance tip flagging irregular financial activity on her work laptop. She'd been managing that hidden account during business hours for the better part of a year, and the company's own IT monitoring caught it. She was placed on administrative leave 2 days later. She called me that week, her voice smaller than I'd heard in years. "Legacy, please. Can we talk? Just us?" I met my wife once, at a coffee shop in East Atlanta Village. She looked different than she had at the airport, the new travel set gone, her eyes red-rimmed. She kept turning that thin gold bracelet on her wrist, the same nervous habit I'd noticed at the airport without understanding it yet. "I made mistakes," she said. "But you have to understand, Legacy. I felt invisible. You were always working, always tired. I wanted to feel wanted again." Her voice dropped. "My mother left when I was 9. Never came back. I think part of me has spent my whole life terrified of being left behind, instead of leaving first." That single sentence explained more than any bank statement could. Chioma hadn't set out to become a woman capable of quietly draining her own family. She'd set out to never again feel that old powerlessness. Somewhere along the way, the fear curdled into control. Leave before you can be left. It was a real wound. But a real wound explains a choice. It doesn't excuse it. "I understand feeling invisible," I said finally. "I turned down a $400,000 contract in Charlotte because you needed me home more. I worked night shifts with my blood pressure through the roof so you wouldn't feel the pinch when you scaled back. I never made you feel like a burden for needing me, Chioma. So I need you to sit with the difference between feeling unseen and choosing, for over a year, to plan a life without me while I was still building one for you." She didn't have an answer. "Jameer told us what he heard you say in the car," I added. "About me being a burden." Something in her face went gray. "He wasn't supposed to hear that." "No," I agreed. "But he did, and he will for a while. That's on you, not on me." I stood up, left a $10 bill for both our coffees, and walked out into the Georgia afternoon without looking back. That night, Jameer found me on the porch swing my daddy had hung decades ago. He sat beside me a long moment before speaking. "Dad, I want to stay with you. Both me and Ngozi talked about it." I put my arm around his shoulders, felt him lean into it. "We'll figure it out together," I told him. "One board at a time." Everything Chioma had built in secret was collapsing in daylight now. But the hardest part of rebuilding was still ahead of us. By late autumn, the affair Chioma had spent over a year protecting had collapsed entirely into public view. Once that airport video started circulating and people around her began connecting the dots, it didn't take long for the rest to unravel, including Brielle Thompson, who, it turned out, had been engaged the whole time to a man who worked in commercial real estate downtown. His family started asking their own questions about missing weekends and unexplained hotel charges. And whatever Chioma believed she and Brielle had been building together dissolved almost overnight once that truth surfaced too. The compliance investigation at Chioma's firm concluded with her termination in October. The internal report citing misuse of company time and equipment to manage personal finances. A quieter, more clinical way of saying that the same account she'd hidden from me had finally caught up with her from a different direction. The divorce itself was finalized that September, quietly, through our attorneys. No courtroom drama required, since neither of us wanted our children anywhere near a witness stand. I kept the house in East Atlanta Village. The woman who used to be my wife simply didn't fight for it. I think, by then, Some part of her understood there was nothing left to win by fighting. My business, meanwhile, did something I hadn't expected. Word travels in Atlanta contracting circles the way word travels anywhere people work with their hands and depend on trust. And somehow, without me ever telling the story to a single client, my reputation as a man who does honest work, who doesn't cut corners, who shows up even when his personal foundation is cracking, started bringing in bigger jobs than I'd ever landed before. By November, I'd hired 2 more subcontractors just to keep up. Chioma tried reaching out more than once in those weeks. Texts mostly, the kind that started apologetic and slowly, over enough messages, started to sound like something closer to justification. I found out through my accountant, going back over old records with fresh eyes now that I knew what to look for, that even after everything, she'd tried to hold on to roughly $9,000 still sitting in accounts connected to my business. Money she hadn't yet moved before the investigation started. Money she was quietly attempting to shift somewhere the kids and I wouldn't be able to trace. I didn't confront her about it loudly. I simply closed every account, opened new ones under names only I controlled, and let my lawyer handle the rest in writing. The kids, slowly, began to breathe easier. Jameer had his best season yet that fall, and I didn't miss a single game, not one, home or away, the way I hadn't always been able to promise before, back when I was working double shifts to cover for what I now understood had been Chioma's spending. He scored the winning goal against a rival school in October, and when he found me in the stands afterward, sweaty and grinning, he didn't say anything about the goal. He just hugged me, hard, the way he used to when he was 7. Ngozi wrote me a letter that same month for a school assignment about someone she admired and left it on my nightstand without saying a word about it. I still have it, folded in my wallet. My dad builds things, she wrote, not just houses. He built our whole family back up after it fell apart, and he never once complained about how heavy it was. One quiet Saturday evening in late October, I gathered the last of Chioma's paperwork that still remained in the house. Old tax documents, a few boxes of things she'd never come back for, and I burned them in the fire pit out back. The same fire pit I'd built myself the summer Jameer turned 12. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because a man has to know when a foundation is truly done, when there's nothing left worth salvaging from what was underneath it, and when it's finally time to clear the ground for something new. I stood there a long while after the last page had curled to ash, watching the smoke rise thin and gray against a sky just starting to purple with evening. And for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like I was still waiting for something to happen. It had already happened. I was just finally standing on the other side of it. Around that same time, at a parent-teacher conference for Ngozi at her middle school, I met a woman named Dr. Renata Cole, an English professor at Spelman College, who also volunteered as an academic mentor for gifted students in the district. Ngozi's science project on erosion, it turned out, had caught her attention enough to recommend her for an accelerated program. We talked for 20 minutes in a school hallway that smelled like fresh paint and old paper, fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead, about nothing important at all. Ngozi's project, a book Renata was teaching, the strange comfort of routine. I didn't ask for her number that day. I wasn't ready. But I noticed for the first time in longer than I could remember that I'd smiled without having to work at it, and that the smiling hadn't cost me anything at all. My mother, when I told her about that conversation, just smiled over her tea and said, "Foundations settle, baby. Doesn't mean they're finished." I sat on that porch swing most evenings that fall, watching my son do homework through the front window, hearing my daughter humming something off-key in her room upstairs, and I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that quiet endurance was the same thing as strength. I understand now that it's only half of it. The other half is knowing when to stop enduring and start rebuilding. Deliberately, honestly, on ground you've actually tested first. I'd spent 17 years building a house I thought would hold. And now, for the first time, I was building one that finally would. 1 year later, almost to the week, I stood inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium with Jameer and Ngozi on either side of me, watching a World Cup qualifier match under lights bright enough to turn the whole field silver. My mother sat beside Ngozi, wrapped in her good church cardigan against the evening chill, clapping every time the home side got within 30 yards of the goal, whether the play deserved it or not. "You did good, Legacy," she said during a lull, patting my knee the way she has since I was small enough to sit on it. "Real good." I was about to answer when Ngozi tugged my sleeve. "Dad," she said, "I need to show you something. I've been holding on to it. I didn't know when the right time was." She pulled out her phone and handed it to me, along with a small spiral notebook she'd apparently been keeping tucked in her backpack for months. Inside the notebook, in her careful 13-year-old handwriting, was a diary entry from over a year earlier, before the airport, before any of it had come to light, describing a night she'd overheard her mother on a video call, laughing with Brielle in the next room. Ngozi had written down, almost word for word, what she'd heard. The way kids sometimes do when something feels wrong, but they don't yet have anywhere to put it. Then she played the video itself, a short clip she'd accidentally recorded on an old tablet 14 months before that day at Gate A23, back when she'd been testing out a new camera app and hadn't realized she'd caught her mother's voice in the background. In it, Chioma's laugh rang out clear and unbothered as she told Brielle, off camera, "The kids adore him, that's the thing. But that won't matter once I show a judge how many nights he's not even home. Legacy's going to hand me exactly what I need without ever knowing he did it." And there, in the corner of the frame for just a flicker of a second, I caught sight of a thin gold bracelet catching the light on her wrist. The same one she'd been wearing at the airport. The same one she couldn't stop touching in that coffee shop months later. I understood then that it hadn't been a nervous habit at all. It had been a gift from someone else, worn the whole time right in front of me, and I'd simply never let myself look closely enough to ask. 14 months. That's how long she'd been planning it, not just the leaving, but the strategy underneath it, using every double shift and missed dinner I'd ever worked to build her case, while I was pulling those same shifts near this very stadium to keep our family standing. I sat with that for a long moment in the stadium noise, the crowd roaring somewhere far away over a play I didn't even see. It should have hurt more than it did. Maybe it had already hurt as much as it was going to, back in that gate area, back at my mother's kitchen table, back in all those quiet nights of finding one more piece of it. What I felt instead, watching my daughter's careful, earnest face, waiting to see if she'd done the right thing by finally showing me, was something closer to gratitude. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby," I told her, pulling her into my side. "Not then, not now. You just held on to the truth until you were ready to hand it to me. That's brave. That's not easy for a grown person to do, let alone a 13-year-old. Jameer, on my other side, had gone quiet, jaw working the way it does when he's holding something back. Finally, he said it. "Dad, you're the strongest person I've ever known. Not because you never got hurt, because you never let it turn you into somebody cruel. I don't know if I could have done that." Ngozi leaned her head against my arm. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered, barely audible over the crowd. "I just wanted you to know that." "I don't need to prove anything anymore," I said, mostly to myself, though I think they both heard it. Not to your mother, not to anybody. I just needed to be the man I already was all along, and let the truth catch up to that on its own time. My mother reached over and took my hand, her grip still strong despite 65 years of holding this family together through every storm it's weathered. "You broke the cycle, son," she said quietly, just for me. "Your father's father never forgave a betrayal without losing himself to bitterness over it. Your father came close to the same thing more than once. But you found a way through it with your dignity still intact. That's generations of healing right there, sitting in these seats tonight." The home team scored in the 78th minute, and the whole stadium erupted. 68,000 strangers on their feet together, and my family stood up with them. My mother clapping with her whole chest, Jameer shouting himself hoarse, Ngozi jumping so hard her braids bounced against her shoulders, and me, standing quiet in the middle of all that noise, finally, fully at peace. This story reminds us that quiet strength has a shape you can hold in your hands, not just a feeling you carry in your chest. If you're still setting the table for someone out of habit, keep doing it. But this Sunday, use the good pie pan, the one saved for something worth celebrating, and bake something for the grandchild who's forgotten your recipes. Then write it out by hand and mail it, not text it. If you manage the family finances, or ever handed that job to someone else, spend one quiet hour this month with your own bank statements. Every account, every name on every signer line. Not out of suspicion, but out of respect for yourself. Dignity isn't loud. It's a woman who knows exactly what's hers, and a family that finally tells each other the truth before the silence does the telling for them. This story was written by a human, with AI as a companion. It was born from a simple wish, to awaken the belief that kindness still exists. And no matter how many trials life brings, there are always moments of justice and quiet miracles waiting for those who deserve them. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.